I was born and raised in a small suburb of Cleveland in the 90s, a time when everything seemed simpler, yet the undercurrents of hidden truths were already setting the stage for disasters I couldn't even imagine. Our home wasn't grand by any standard, but it was my castle nonetheless. I still remember the creaky hardwood floors, the cloying scent of Mom's apple pie on a chilly fall evening, and the way our small living room would glow under the flicker of a cathode ray television set. I was the middle child in a family that, to outsiders, seemed inseparable. But even from a young age, I noticed that every family has its hidden layers. Dad was the unquestionable pillar of the household, a hard-working, no-nonsense businessman who could fix just about anything, from a busted lawnmower to a leaky faucet. I adored him, following him around the little workshop in our garage where the strong aroma of motor oil blended with the unmistakable sound of classic rock from an old radio. Those moments, as I watched him meticulously work on cars and old bicycles, were the only times I felt truly safe. He was the epitome of strength and reliability, or so I believed. Mom, on the other hand, was the silent glue that held us together. She rarely let her true feelings show, always armed with a gentle smile and soft words meant to soothe any discord. Yet there was an unmistakable melancholy in her eyes on some days, a quiet resignation to the burdens she carried alone. Looking back, I realize she was the keeper of secrets, each one she buried deep beneath layers of polite conversation and kindly when Dad fell ill. I remember the day like a bad dream that wouldn't end. The air at home grew heavy, thick with the scent of antiseptic and dread as we sat in the sterile corridors of the hospital waiting room. The doctor's words were muffled by the relentless beeping of monitors and the soft hum of the fluorescent lights. The diagnosis was swift and brutal: pancreatic cancer. To my young, uncomprehending mind, it all felt unreal, as if we were trapped in a nightmare that had no exit. It was around then that subtle changes began to surface in the way my siblings, Jake, the eldest, and Lily, the youngest, conducted themselves. Jake, who had always carried himself with the aloofness of someone who thought he was above the rest, started to assume a role that chilled me to the core. In the bleak corridors of the hospital, behind curtained rooms and hushed exchanges, I caught whispers of clandestine phone calls and furtive glances exchanged between him and a man I later learned was a lawyer. The subject? Dad's inheritance. Dad had always promised that his hard-won money and cherished family heirlooms would be shared evenly among us. That promise, once a beacon of fairness, now seemed as brittle as the old, peeling wallpaper in our dining room. I was a teenager then, still clinging to the naive belief that blood was thicker than water, that the ties of family could never be severed by greed. But deep down, I began noticing little discrepancies. A faded envelope found in Dad's study with scribbled notes that I couldn't quite decipher, hushed side comments when my questions came too close to the truth, the way Jake's eyes would narrow for a heartbeat whenever I mentioned our inheritance. Every detail, no matter how minute, compounded into a growing sense of dread that something was terribly amiss. Still, a cool, crisp autumn night when the wind rattled the windows of our modest home. I was sitting in my room, headphones on, oblivious to the murmurs seeping through the walls from the kitchen. A conversation that sounded as if it was meant for no one but my siblings. I crept closer, half afraid to hear what they were plotting. I caught fragments, words like legacy, fair share, discrepancy, and, worst of all, control. My heart pounded like a runaway train on tracks, and I retreated, shaken by the realization that perhaps the person I had once trusted most, Jake, was already embracing a darker side I had never seen before. At the dinner table that night, the air felt heavier than the scent of roasted turkey and spilled gravy. Mom forced smiles while fidgeting with her napkin, and Lily, her eyes wide and uncomprehending, kept her head bowed. It was as if the normalcy of our family rituals was a fragile veneer over a deep, festering wound. I remember how Jake's voice, usually so confident and smooth, carried a strange undercurrent of something cold and calculating. He would lean forward as if sharing a secret with each word, his eyes glinting with a determination that I'd never seen before. I sat there, silently stewing in my own thoughts, feeling like I was caught between loyalty and a desperate need to understand why our father's legacy was being toyed with. Every passing moment, every shared glance around the table, deepened the rift in my heart. I'd started jotting down observations in an old, leather-bound notebook that had once belonged to Dad, a habit I initially thought was just teenage curiosity but soon realized was something else entirely. I began to record names, dates, and snippets of overheard conversations, each note a fragment of the unfolding puzzle that hinted at my silent confidant, a tangible record of my growing suspicion and pain. Over the next few weeks, with Dad's condition deteriorating, I became more vigilant. I would shadow Jake when he stepped out to take mysterious phone calls and even trailed him on one rainy afternoon as he made his way to an address I later discovered belonged to a solicitor's office. The rain tapped a steady, relentless beat on the pavement, a punctuation that underscored the rhythm of my discontent and the dread churning in my stomach. It wasn't just the mystery of the inheritance that shook me, it was the dawning realization that our family, the very core of who I believed I was rotting from the inside out. That small, seemingly unbreakable bond forged by years of shared laughter, holiday dinners, and secret jokes was under threat. The more I observed, the more I began to see that Jake's ambitions weren't driven by a desire for fairness, they were motivated by control and the hunger for power. His unspoken promise was that once Dad was gone, he would not just take charge, he would monopolize everything that belonged to him, leaving the rest of us to grapple with the remnants of a shattered legacy. And so, in the darkness of that long, turbulent night, I made a silent vow. I would not allow Dad's memory, his honor, or his hard-won legacy to be defiled by a greed-fueled betrayal. I was just a kid then. Yet even in my tender despair, a spark of determination ignited within me. I decided that no matter how painful it would be, I needed to unearth the whole truth, pieces and bits of stolen signatures, misdirected funds, and the subtle manipulations behind every family conversation. It wasn't just about money anymore, it was about preserving the dignity of a man who had given everything for us, and about honoring that promise he made long before any whispers of betrayal began. It was a time of innocence pierced by the sting of adult betrayal, a bittersweet lesson in trust, deception, and the harsh reality that even the ones we love most can hide the darkest secrets. As I lay in my bed that night, staring up at a ceiling with the air heavy as if carrying the weight of 1,000 unsaid words, I made my move. Jake had slipped out under the guise of a meeting after dinner. I followed him, tucked away in the back of my beat-up car, as we wove through the sleepy streets of our neighborhood. The hum of the engine, coupled with the occasional distant siren, formed a grim soundtrack to my thoughts. Every bump in the road seemed to echo the shocks I felt inside. My destination became clear when Jake pulled up outside a nondescript office building in a part of town I'd never truly visited before. Its facade was plain, almost forgotten, and I instantly suspected it was the sort of place where secrets could be bought and sold. I parked a few blocks away, the vehicle hidden among others in a rundown lot, and began to walk. The summer heat bore down on me, and sweat mixed with the adrenaline that fueled my every step. I knew that what I was about to do could change everything, yet I pressed on, driven by a need for truth and justice. I hovered near a side entrance, listening intently for voices. I could make out fragments of conversation, the clipped tones of business talk intertwined with cautious reassurances, and my heart pounded in rhythm with every word I caught. I pressed myself against the cool brick wall, the rough texture grounding me as I tried to rationalize the intensity of my emotions. Each whispered word, every furtive chuckle, confirmed what I'd feared. Jake was deep in a financial game that went far beyond the promises of family inheritance. It was a labyrinth of insider deals, forged documents, and hidden accounts designed to funnel away our fathers like emerging from a well after being submerged too long. I could no longer cling to the false comfort of ignorance. The evidence was now irrefutable, and in the depths of my despair, I realized that exposure would be the only path to restoring the honor Dad had left behind. Although every fiber of my being trembled with the enormity of the task ahead, I knew that the silent suffering I'd endured was now fueling my fight. Over the following weeks, I became a diligent detective in my own right. I spent long nights in the dim light of my desk lamp, cross-referencing dates, tracking down financial records, and unearthing a trail of documents that painted a damning picture. I visited old family friends and distant relatives, coaxing details from them about past meetings and undisclosed financial arrangements. Each conversation was like peeling back a layer of a well-crafted lie, something that made Jake's carefully built facade begin to crumble. I even visited the old bank in town, poring over ancient ledgers with the help of a sympathetic teller who remembered Dad as a regular. The bank records revealed withdrawals and transfers that didn't add up, small sums that, when pieced together, formed a picture of systematic night in November. When the wind howled like a banshee and the streets seemed deserted, I sat in the musty back room of a tiny, old library and sifted through stacks of discarded mail and archived statements. The soft rustling of paper was punctuated by my heavy breaths, and the only light came from a solitary desk lamp casting long shadows across the room. I found an envelope with crisp, official lettering, a statement from a small offshore account that I had never heard of before. In that moment, surrounded by the scent of old books and dust, everything clicked. The small clues, scattered like fragments of a shattered mirror, began to form a coherent image. Jake had orchestrated a covert plan to reroute funds to accounts hidden away in tax havens. A move that would secure his future while leaving the rest of us to drown in the wake of our father's shattered trust. The deeper I delved into this financial labyrinth, the more I recognized how ruthless my eldest brother had become. This wasn't a misguided attempt at efficiency or a temporary lapse in judgment, it was a calculated act of betrayal. I felt a mix of sorrow and rage as I realized that every scheme, every document signed in haste, was a deliberate move in a game where the stakes were our family's very essence. Balancing the mounting evidence with the burden of my own doubts was agonizing. I wondered if it was truly within my power to challenge someone who had, for years, held the reins of our family's fortune. Yet, every fiber of my being screamed that surrender was not an option. My nights were consumed by the bitter taste of determination and regret for a time when I had been oblivious to the undercurrents of ambition and greed that pulsed beneath the surface of our daily fragments of the puzzle. I knew that I had to act before it was too late. With every new discovery, the duality of my feelings deepened, a fierce resolve to bring the truth to light intertwined with an aching sorrow for the family I once believed in unconditionally. And so, on a chilly evening that seemed to foreshadow the turning point, I prepared my dossier, thick, meticulously annotated, and laden with evidence that would shake the foundations of everything Jake had built. That dossier was more than mere paper and ink, it was a testament to the truth, a record of lies, and a battle cry against the corruption that had already ruined so many lives. I reread every page, steeling myself for the moment when I'd have to confront my brother, to expose him, and to force the rest of the family to confront a reality they'd long refused to acknowledge. Looking back now, I realized that the weeks I spent gathering that evidence were among the most harrowing of my life. They were the long, sleepless nights of relentless pursuit for justice, the days when hope and despair warred within me, and the silent hours when only my beating heart bore witness to the slow transformation from a broken-hearted child to a determined avenger. Every step I took was laden with the knowledge that, come what may, there would be no turning back. I'll never forget the day when everything culminated, the day I decided to let the evidence speak its truth. It was a frigid evening in early December 1998, the kind of night where the icy wind seemed to cut right through you and every shadow played tricks with your senses. The stage was set at our family's old farmhouse, a place that once symbolized togetherness but had now become the crucible for all our long was meant to be a simple post-funeral dinner. The weight of silence was overwhelming. Each of us sat at the long, scarred oak dining table with our personal turmoil hidden behind polite nods and carefully measured words. My heart pounded fiercely as I sat there, my eyes fixed on the thick dossier I had prepared over countless sleepless nights. Every document, every faded bank statement, every secret letter scrawled on yellowed paper was now collected into that one damning collection. I knew that in a matter of moments, I would expose it all, and nothing would ever be the same. I could feel a tightening in my chest as I watched Jake. He sat at the head of the table, his posture rigid and his eyes too bright for the situation. His calm smile, meant to reassure the rest of us, now seemed forced, a mask barely concealing his inner turmoil. Mom's trembling hands and Lily's downcast eyes were enough to tell me that she, too, was aware of the unspoken tension swirling in the air. For years, we had all pretended that everything was fine, burying our grief, anger, and betrayals under a veneer of normality. But tonight was the breaking point. I cleared my throat, my voice sounding small in the cavernous silence of that old room. "I've found something in Dad's records," I began, my words careful and deliberate as I slid the dossier toward the center of the table. In that fleeting, charged moment, time seemed to slow down. I could see every flicker of reaction, Lily's wide eyes, the faint tightening around Mom's mouth, and even Jake's momentary hesitation that betrayed his usual smug confidence. I opened the dossier and began recounting, in painstaking detail, how our father's carefully laid out wishes had been systematically undermined. I recited aloud the faded handwritten notes, the bank receipts, and the copies of correspondence that clearly outlined how funds were being quietly diverted from our rightful inheritance. Each word rang out against the backdrop of heavy silence, a silence so thick it felt as though the walls themselves were absorbing every painful revelation. I saw the slow unraveling of Jake's composure. He started to interject with weak denials, his tone shaky and desperate as he attempted to paint my evidence as misinterpretations of misunderstood documents. But with every counter-argument, I pressed further. I had anticipated every dodge, every half-truth he might throw my way, and I met them head-on with the undeniable weight of the facts. I could see Mom's eyes fill with tears, a look of disbelief and sorrow that made my stomach twist with regret for the family we used to be. Lily's trembling hands reached out as if in desperate hope for someone to step in and end this nightmare. The conversation turned from hushed whispers to chaotic shouts, echoing off the rustic walls as long-suppressed emotions burst forth. Amid the cacophony, I felt a bitter vindication, as though every injustice I'd witnessed was finally being laid bare for all to see. I was no longer a silent observer in my own life, I had become its reluctant avenger. The room, once filled with the strained normalcy of what should have been a grieving family dinner, transformed into an arena of confrontations. Every lie, every secret deal, was laid out like so many cards on a table. The truth, the undeniable, brutal truth, was setting a fire in horror and relief as Jake's carefully constructed persona shattered piece by piece. In one moment, he was the composed, authoritative brother we had all known. In the next, his face contorted with panic and guilt as he struggled to grasp the full extent of the betrayal he had orchestrated. "You don't understand," he stammered, voice quavering under the force of the revelations. "I was trying to protect us." But his words rang hollow, drowned out by the roar of our collective grief and anger. That night, the old farmhouse bore witness to the collapse of our family's carefully constructed facade. The evidence I had painstakingly gathered was no longer just cold technical details, it was the soul of our father's legacy crying out for justice. I felt my heart shatter a little with each accusation hurled at him, with each tear that slipped silently down Mom's cheek and with every look of despair from Lily. I wasn't taking revenge for revenge's sake, I was reclaiming a memory, our father's memory, that had been tarnished by deceit and selfish ambition. After that explosive confrontation, chaos reigned. Phone calls flew, harsh words filled the aftermath of dinner, and family members who had long kept their distance suddenly emerged from the shadows, demanding answers. The legal battle that followed was swift and merciless. My dossier became the cornerstone of a court case that dismantled Jake's stranglehold on our father's assets. It wasn't just about money, it was about trust, about the betrayal of family bonds that once smelled of polished wood and stale coffee. I watched as the evidence was meticulously scrutinized. The judge, a somber, no-nonsense man, acknowledged that the clear-cut proof couldn't be ignored. With every testimony, every corroborating document, the truth that Jake's machinations had not only compromised our inheritance but had also devastated our family came to light. I recall the day the verdict was delivered. It was a quiet afternoon at the courthouse, with a winter chill outside, mirroring the cold efficiency of the justice that was finally being done. For Jake, the ramifications were swift. His reputation, meticulously built over decades, was demolished in one fell swoop. Legal sanctions stripped him of control over the empire he had so viciously constructed. It felt like a bittersweet victory, an exorcism of the darker part of our history, yet at a tremendous personal cost. I remember seeing him leave the courthouse with his head bowed, the aura of invincibility replaced by a palpable defeat that resonated deeply with every person who had once admired him. Yet, even as the legal storm dissipated, the emotional fallout clung to every member of our fractured family. The reverberations of that night, the truth laid bare at the dinner table, the courtroom drama, the irrevocable changes, echoed in our lives long after the legal dust had settled. I found myself grappling with complex feelings of vindication, guilt, and sorrow. I wasn't entirely unscathed by the confrontation. In fact, it left me with a raw, aching emptiness that I couldn't quite fill. My victory had come at the cost of an unbridgeable gap between my past and who I had become, replaying the events in my mind, questioning whether exposing everything had been right or if I had crossed a line that should never be crossed, even for justice. There were moments when, late at night, I would look in the mirror and see not just the scarred survivor of family betrayal but also the ghost of a younger self who had once believed in the sanctity of family bonds. The weight of my choices pressed on me relentlessly, the personal connections lost, the beloved memories tainted by distrust, and the quiet understanding that sometimes truth comes with a steep price. In the months following the trial, our family was never quite the same. Some relatives, shocked into clarity, rallied around me, perhaps too late to mend what was broken, but at least to salvage the remnants of our father's true legacy. Others could not bear the weight of such exposed truths and drifted away into silence or bitter resentment. The farmhouse, which had once echoed with laughter and the clinking of glasses at family celebrations, now stood as a monument to our shattered unity. Throughout that turbulent period, I found solace in small moments of quiet reflection. I started attending a support group for families torn apart by betrayal, where I shared my story in the hope that it might help someone else navigate the dark corridors of deception and regret. It was in those sessions that I learned one of life's harshest truths, that sometimes, even the pursuit of justice can leave you questioning your own humanity. The path I had chosen was filled with moral ambiguity. Every triumph over deceit was intertwined with the bitter taste of what had been lost. Lies remains etched in my memory, a night when the force of undeniable truth crushed the fragile illusions we had all desperately clung to. That evening wasn't simply about reclaiming our inheritance, it was a transformative moment that redefined my very understanding of loyalty, responsibility, and self-worth. In dismantling Jake's carefully crafted deceptions, I had inadvertently dismantled parts of myself. Yet, amid the wreckage, I also found a glimmer of hope, a promise that, even in betrayal, one might learn to forge a future based on honesty and resilience. As I sit here now, far removed from that stormy night, I reflect on the long, winding road that led me to this point of bittersweet liberation. I know that what I did can never be undone, that the raw wounds of that night will forever be a part of me. But I also recognize that in fighting against the poisonous tide of betrayal, I reclaimed not only my father's legacy but a part of my own soul that had nearly been extinguished by the darkness of deceit. After the storm of that turbulent night, my life, our family's life, entered a long, uneven period of aftermath. The courthouse verdict, as satisfying as it was in its swift justice, wasn't the end. Instead, it was the beginning of a slow, agonizing process of piecing together what remained of our broken bonds while learning to live with the echoing consequences of that. Following the trial, the air around our family home felt oppressively heavy. I'd expected a cathartic release, a moment in which the truth would wash away the bitterness of betrayal. Yet, every conversation, every tear-filled silence, reminded me how deep the wounds truly ran. Jake, stripped of his ill-gotten power and dignity, retreated into himself. He avoided family gatherings and phone calls, and his eyes, once brimming with the arrogance of a man who had once commanded our trust, now spoke only of regret and shattered illusions. I would catch him late at night, staring blankly at the faded wallpaper in his once commanding study, as if searching the empty space for a sliver of the self he'd lost. Mom sank into a quiet sorrow in the weeks that followed. The vibrant woman who had always been the heart of our household now wore a permanent look of defeat. Every small household chore, a pot boiling on the stove, a door creaking open, became a painful reminder of the love and unity that had dissolved under the weight of deceit. I tried to reach out, to offer comfort, but the silence that filled the gaps between our words felt insurmountable. I was there, present, trying to mend the pieces of our past, yet it felt as if I were holding together a crumbling dam with my bare hands. Lily, our once carefree sister, oscillated between numbness and a desperate need for reassurance. At school, her eyes were distant, and every laugh that wasn't forced was a battle fought behind a facade of normalcy. I remember one afternoon walking her home from an after-school event, the quiet hum of a passing car the only sound breaking the oppressive silence between us. Her small hand clutched mine, seeking both support and solace, and I realized then that our family had been forever altered, not simply by the legal resolution but by the irrevocable changes to our nights wrestling with my own demons. The victory in court, as necessary as it had been, came at a cost. I'd exposed our darkest secrets, not out of a thirst for unbridled revenge, but as a desperate bid to reclaim a legacy that was slipping through our fingers like sand. Yet, in the depth of my soul, I couldn't shake a gnawing sensation of guilt. I had become the unwilling arbiter of my family's undoing, and even as the truth set us free from the deception, it also fractured the delicate bonds that had once held us so tightly together. I began attending regular sessions at a support group for people struggling with family betrayal. I had expected these meetings to be a lifeline, a way to share my story and, perhaps, find some solace in the similarities of other people's experiences. Instead, I found myself reflecting on the complexity of human nature, how our deepest hurt could sometimes drive us to unthinkable lengths, and yet also spur us to find an inner strength we never knew we had. The man I was forced to become in order to fight back was not the same as the boy who once believed in the invincibility of familial love. I was older now, a bit wearier, definitely more scarred, and yet perhaps a little wiser too. The initial legal battles eventually fizzled into a muted norm of tense family interactions. Occasionally, relatives reached out to me, not with open arms but with cautious expressions born out of their own guilt and regret. Phone calls were sparse, filled with awkward pauses, as if we were all collectively trying to determine where to go from the ruins of the old days. I took solace in small victories, rebuilding a semblance of an honest life in spite of the chaos. I enrolled in night classes for financial law and estate planning, driven partly by a need to understand how I could have been so easily manipulated, and partly by a desire to empower myself against any future betrayals. And slowly, the edges of that dark chapter began to blur. Jake eventually emerged from his self-imposed exile, not as a restored leader, but as a humbled, quieter man resigned to a life of regret. We exchanged terse greetings at family events, each meeting layered with the unspoken acknowledgement that nothing would ever return to what it was before. I never truly forgave him, nor did he, at least not in any way that bridged the chasm between us. Our interactions remained polite, a fragile truce built on the mutual recognition of our shared past, but always tinged with a subdued, lingering bitterness. As for me, I found a surprising form of redemption in turning my pain into purpose. I began writing about my experience, initially as a means to exorcise my own demons and later as a way to warn others. I authored several articles for a local magazine on the devastating impact of financial abuse within families, detailing everything from legal nuances to the intricate psychology of betrayal. Those writings, raw and unapologetic, connected with readers far and wide, people who saw reflections of their own struggles in my confessions. Every published piece, every letter of thanks I received, was a small step toward healing. I was no longer a silent victim. I had taken control of my narrative, using the scars of my past as a roadmap to help others navigate their own treacherous paths. Came during one particularly rainy afternoon as I sat alone in a modest cafe tucked away in a quiet corner of Cleveland. The pattering rain on the window felt rhythmic, a steady reminder that storms pass, leaving behind cleansed streets and new beginnings. I was revisiting an old, leather-bound journal where I'd first recorded every moment of betrayal and pain. As I read through the jumbled, frantic scribbles of that desperate time, I realized that every word had led me to this present moment, not as a man solely driven by the need for revenge, but as someone who had learned to rise above the wreckage and rebuild. The taste of liberation was bittersweet. I'd reclaimed Dad's legacy, sure, but the cost had been the innocence I once possessed and the enduring fractures within our family. Yet, in that compromise, I found a sliver of light. I began to see that the pursuit of truth and justice, however painful and fraught with ethical ambiguities, had ultimately set me free to redefine my own identity. I was no longer merely the son of a man who had given everything, I was the keeper of a legacy that now held a deeper, more complex meaning. My father's values, hard work, fairness, integrity, had become a beacon in the murk of betrayal, guiding me through the darkness of regret. I started to believe that perhaps forgiveness was not about erasing the past but understanding that it was an intrinsic part of who we become. I eventually reached out to Mom, and though our conversations were halting and laden with sorrow, they marked the beginning of a tentative reconciliation. We'd sit together on the back porch, the light fading as dusk set in, and talk, not about the legalities or the shattered promises, but about the memories of happier times, of his laughter echoing off the walls of his workshop, of family dinners where love was the only currency. There was an almost imperceptible thaw in the frost that had long enveloped our interactions, a slow, almost imperceptible mending of things that once seemed irreparably broken. I know now that revenge, however meticulously planned and justified in the moment, leaves scars that can't simply be patched up by court orders or legal settlements. The aftermath is a lifetime of reckoning with the consequences of our choices, a continuous negotiation between the need for justice and the need for inner peace. The nights are sometimes restless, filled with dreams of what could have been, and the mornings bring with them the weight of memories that are as heavy as they are instructive. Yet, as I look in the mirror these days, I see more than the haunted eyes of a victim or the steely gaze of an avenger. I see resilience forged in the fiery crucible of family betrayal, a reminder that even when the ones you love betray you, you can still rediscover yourself and rebuild a life defined not by loss, but by strength. I carry with me the lessons of that dark chapter, using them as a compass to navigate future storms, both large and small. I'm not trying to glorify the pain or celebrate the bitter victory of revenge. Instead, I hope it serves as a testament that the most difficult battles often teach us the most enduring lessons. Family may be the first place where trust is forged, but it can also be the crucible where we learn the most about loyalty, forgiveness, and the complex nature of love. I'm still on that road to healing, and every day is a reminder that while the scars may never fully fade, they are symbols of survival, proof that I chose not to let my family's downfall define me, but rather to transform it into something that could light the way for others. So here I am, a man irrevocably changed by the tumult of betrayal and the arduous climb toward redemption. I continue to write, to speak out, and to seek moments of genuine connection in a world that sometimes seems so indifferent. And while the lingering bitterness of the past will always whisper its reminders, I've learned that true freedom comes not from erasing those memories, but from embracing them as part of the tapestry of who I am. Thank you for reading this long, winding journey of anger, pain, and ultimately, the slow, healing power of truth. I hope my story resonates with anyone who's ever felt betrayed or broken, and I hope it reminds you that even in the darkest times, there is a path forward, a path paved with courage, learning, and, yes, even a measure of bittersweet forgiveness.